The mission briefing lasted 4 minutes. Commander Sava stood behind her console, her silver eyes sweeping over the holographic display with the kind of boredom that told everyone in the room exactly how unimportant she thought this assignment was. There was an old relay station near the border of the Outer Reach that had gone dark 3 weeks ago. Coalition Command wanted someone to go check on it. That someone was Fire Team Kale. The station has been offline since the last maintenance cycle, Sava said. It is likely a power failure. Go in, reset the systems, report back. This is a low-priority sweep suitable for your team's current capabilities. She did not look at Cole when she said it, but she did not have to. Everyone in the room understood who that comment was aimed at. Cole stood at the back of the briefing room with his arms at his sides, his scarred face showing nothing. He had already memorized the station schematics from his datapad the night before. He knew every corridor, every access hatch, every blind corner. He said nothing and followed the team to the shuttle bay. On the shuttle, Draven sat across from Cole and stretched his massive arms, his gray armored plates grinding together with a low scraping sound. He looked at Cole's hands, at the white lines crisscrossing the skin, and shook his head. I have always wondered, Draven said, loud enough for everyone to hear, why do humans scar like that? My people regenerate. A wound heals, the plate grows back, and the skin is whole again. But you humans, you just stay broken. You collect your damage and carry it around with you forever. It is like your bodies do not even try. Torin let out a short laugh from his seat near the cockpit. Maybe that is why they send them to border duty, he said. Less chance of them breaking anything important. Gela hummed a soft tone that might have been disapproval, or might have been nothing at all. She was hard to read. Cole did not look up from his rifle. He was checking the charge on his power cells, one by one, slotting them into place with the smooth, practiced motion of someone who had done it 10,000 times. His fingers moved with steady precision. He did not respond to Draven. He did not respond to Torin. He finished checking his weapon, set it across his knees, and closed his eyes for the remaining 20 minutes of the flight. The relay station was a small, boxy structure anchored to an asteroid at the edge of Coalition space. It was supposed to be empty. The exterior lights were off, and the docking clamps engaged with a dull metallic thud that echoed through the shuttle. Cole opened his eyes the moment the ship stopped moving, picked up his rifle, and was the first one standing at the airlock. Draven pushed past him. Stay behind me, Patchwork. Try not to trip over your own scars. They moved through the airlock in single file. The interior of the station was dark. Emergency lighting cast everything in a dull red glow that made the metal walls look like they were bleeding. The air was cold and stale. Cole's breath came out in thin clouds. Something was wrong. Cole felt it the moment he stepped inside. The station was not just offline. It was occupied. He could smell it. A sharp chemical scent that did not belong to any Coalition species he knew. He started to speak, to warn the team, but Draven was already 10 meters ahead, walking straight down the main corridor, with his shoulders squared, and his weapon held carelessly at his side. The first shot came from the ceiling. A bolt of superheated plasma punched through the darkness and hit Draven in the right shoulder. The impact cracked his armored plate with a sound like breaking stone and sent him stumbling sideways into the wall. Torin screamed. Not a battle cry, just a scream. The raw, high-pitched sound of someone who had never been shot at and had no idea what to do about it. He dropped to the floor and pressed himself flat, his rifle clattering away from him. More shots followed. They came from everywhere, from the ceiling vents, from side corridors, from behind sealed doors that were suddenly not sealed anymore. Shapes moved in the red darkness. They were insectoid, fast, with hard black shells and multiple limbs that ended in either blades or weapons. Their eyes glowed a faint amber in the emergency lighting, and they made a clicking, chattering sound as they advanced. Gela was pinned behind a support column, her crystalline body pulsing with rapid, panicked light. She could not reach Draven. She could not reach anyone. Cole moved. There was no hesitation. There was no pause to process fear or surprise, or any of the things that froze the others in place. Cole dropped to one knee, brought his rifle up, and fired 3 shots in 2 seconds. Each one hit a Rathaki center mass. The bodies dropped. Then his voice cut through the chaos, calm and low and absolutely steady. Torin, 3 meters to your left, there is a cargo crate. Get behind it. Pick up your rifle. There are 2 hostiles in the ceiling vent above you at your 10 o'clock. When I give you the word, you shoot the one on the left. I will take the right. Torin stared at him with wide golden eyes. Cole met his gaze and held it. Now, Torin. Torin moved. He scrambled to the cargo crate, grabbed his rifle, and looked up. He saw them. 2 Rathaki clinging to the ceiling vent like enormous insects, their weapons tracking the corridor below. Fire, Cole said. Torin fired. The left Rathaki fell. Cole's shot took the right one half a second later. Cole was already moving again. He directed Gela through a covered route along the wall, using hand signals he had taught himself from a Coalition field manual. Gela understood. She flowed along the wall like living water, her crystal body low and fast, until she reached Draven. Draven was bleeding, a thick, dark fluid seeping from the crack in his shoulder plate. He was trying to stand, and failing. Gela placed her hands on the wound, and her body began to hum, a deep, resonant vibration that Cole could feel in his chest. The bleeding slowed. Cole provided cover fire. He moved through the corridor with a kind of controlled violence that none of his squadmates had ever seen. Every shot was placed with intent. Every step had purpose. He did not spray fire wildly or charge forward recklessly. He read the battlefield like a language he had been speaking his whole life, anticipating where the Rathaki would appear and being ready when they did. A Rathaki warrior dropped from a vent directly in front of him, blade raised. Cole sidestepped, took the blade across his ribs, and shot the creature through the head at point-blank range. Blood, his own, began to soak through his shirt. He did not stop. He pressed a field dressing against the wound with one hand, and kept his rifle up with the other, calling out enemy positions to Torin in that same calm, steady voice. They fought for 11 minutes. When the last Rathaki fell, the corridor was littered with bodies, and the red emergency lights painted everything in shades of rust and shadow. Cole leaned against the wall and finished taping the dressing over his wound. His hands were covered in blood, some of it his, and some of it not. He looked at his squad. Torin was shaking, but alive. Gela was still working on Draven's shoulder, humming a complex melody that seemed to ease the pain on the big Velthari's face. Draven was staring at Cole with an expression that Cole had never seen on him before. It was not gratitude exactly. It was something closer to confusion, as if the entire framework through which Draven understood humans had just been shattered, and he did not know what to replace it with. Nobody spoke on the shuttle ride back to Threshold. Torin sat with his rifle across his knees, and his eyes fixed on the new wound on Cole's side, watching the blood slowly seep through the field dressing. He was thinking about every scar he had seen on the human's body, and for the first time, he was starting to understand that each one had a story like this. Each one was a moment where Cole Brannigan should have stopped, and did not. Draven sat with his cracked shoulder plate, and said nothing. He did not call Cole Patchwork. He did not make any jokes. Gela hummed a low, gentle tone that filled the shuttle with a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. Cole did not understand her language, but something about that sound made the tightness in his chest loosen just a little. Commander Savas reviewed the mission report the next morning. Her official summary credited the squad's survival to adequate squad cohesion under unexpected circumstances. Cole's name appeared once, listed simply as a team member. He did not complain. He did not expect anything different. He went to the medbay, let them stitch his wound properly, and walked back to the barracks with a new scar forming over his ribs. It was just another door he had walked through. The weeks after the relay station changed things in ways that nobody talked about, but everyone felt. Fireteam Kale was no longer a group of strangers sharing a barracks. They were not friends yet either. They were something in between, held together by the memory of shared violence and the quiet understanding that Cole Brannigan was not what any of them had expected. The missions kept coming, and each one was worse than the last. Rathaki activity along the outer reach was increasing at a pace that made even the senior officers on Threshold start paying attention. Raiding parties hit supply convoys, scout ships vanished without distress signals. Border outposts reported movement in sectors that had been quiet for decades. Something was building out there in the dark, and Fireteam Kale was being sent deeper into it with every new assignment. Cole used the time between missions to train his squad, not in the official way, with scheduled drills and graded exercises, but in his own way, quiet and practical, and built on the simple truth that training was the only thing standing between them and a body bag. He started with Torin. The young Drasani was a natural marksman. His eyes could track a moving target at distances that would be impossible for a human, and his reflexes were faster than anything Cole had ever seen. But Torin's problem was not skill. It was fear. He had frozen at the relay station, and they both knew it. Cole did not shame him for it. Instead, he took Torin to the shooting range every evening and stood beside him while he fired. "Slow your breathing," Cole told him. "Your body wants to panic. That is normal. Every living thing panics when it is about to die. The difference between a soldier and a dead man is what you do in the 3 seconds after the panic starts. You breathe. You aim. You shoot. Everything else can wait." Torin practiced until his scales ached and his eyes burned. After 2 weeks, he could drop a target at 400 meters while someone was screaming in his ear. After 3 weeks, he could do it while Cole threw flash grenades at his feet. He never froze again. Draven was a different challenge. The Velthari was strong, possibly the strongest individual Cole had ever worked with. He could punch through a reinforced door with his bare fists, and his armored body could absorb impacts that would kill most species. But Draven fought like a battering ram. He charged straight forward and hit whatever was in front of him. And he had survived this long only because his natural armor was good enough to forgive his lack of tactics. Cole sparred with him every morning. It was ridiculous in some ways, a scarred human half his size circling around an alien tank. But Cole had fought things bigger than Draven before and survived. He taught the Velthari how to use his size as an advantage instead of a crutch, where to stand so that enemies had to come to him on his terms, how to read an opponent's movement and wait for the moment when strength could be applied with precision instead of just force. Draven resisted at first. His pride would not let him accept lessons from a human, especially a human whose body was a map of damage. But after Cole put him on the ground 3 times in a single session by exploiting the same blind spot that the Rathaki would have used, Draven stopped resisting and started listening. The hardest work was with Gela. The Sheik medic communicated through harmonic vibrations, a language of tones and frequencies that most species could not hear, let alone understand. Coalition translators could handle basic phrases, but in the chaos of combat, there was no time for a translator. Cole needed to understand Gela directly. Every night, after the training sessions, he sat with Gela in the barracks and listened to her hum. At first it was just noise, beautiful noise, but meaningless. Slowly, patterns emerged. A rising tone meant danger. A falling tone meant safety. A sharp, quick pulse meant move now. A long, low resonance meant hold position. Cole could not reproduce the sounds, but he trained his ears to recognize them, and after weeks of patient practice, he could understand Gela's basic field commands without any translation. Gela responded to this effort with a kind of quiet devotion. She adjusted her frequencies to ranges that were easier for human ears to process, shifting her natural voice to accommodate his limitations. It was a gesture that, among the Sheik, was deeply personal. Cole did not fully understand what it meant, but he felt the warmth in it, and he was grateful. One evening, the four of them sat together in the mess hall, after a long day of drills. The station was quieter than usual. A supply ship had brought real food instead of the usual synthetic rations, and even Dravon seemed to be in something close to a good mood. Torin was eating a fruit from his homeworld, something purple and soft that he had been saving, and he looked at Cole across the table with an expression that had been building for weeks. "Cole," Torin said, "I want to ask you something, and you do not have to answer." Cole looked at him and waited. "Your scars," Torin said. "What happened?" The table went quiet. Dravon stopped chewing. Gela's hum dropped to a barely audible whisper. Cole was silent for a long time, not because he was angry, and not because he didn't want to answer. He was silent because the answer was heavy, and he wanted to carry it out carefully. "Harkin 4, he said finally. 3 years ago, my platoon was sent to evacuate a colony that was being overrun by a Rithaki raiding force. 60 of us went in." He paused. 9 came out. He told them what happened, not like a hero telling a war story, but like a man reading a report about someone else's life. The Rithaki had ambushed them in the jungle. The first wave killed 20 soldiers in under a minute. The survivors scattered. Communications went down. The extraction point was 6 miles through burning jungle, and the Rithaki were hunting them the entire way. Cole had gathered everyone he could find, 11 soldiers, most of them wounded. He led them through the jungle on foot, carrying his rifle in one hand because the other arm was broken in 2 places and hanging useless at his side. When 2 of the soldiers could not walk anymore, he carried them, one on his back and one dragging beside him, through mud and fire and the sound of the Rithaki clicking in the trees around them. His voice did not change when he said her name, but something in his eyes shifted, like a door opening onto a dark room. She was 23. She was a field engineer. She had a picture of her dog taped inside her helmet. I carried her on my back for the last 2 miles. She kept talking to me the whole time, telling me to keep going, telling me her dog's name was Biscuit, and that someone needed to take care of him if she did not make it. He stopped again. She died 30 feet from the extraction point. 30 feet. I was close enough to see the lights of the shuttle when she stopped breathing. The mess hall seemed very far away. The sound of other soldiers eating and talking faded into nothing. There was just Cole's voice, quiet and steady, and the weight of what he was saying. "Every scar on my body is from that night," he said. "And I carry them because my body will not let me forget. Those people deserved better than what they got, and the least I can do is remember them." Nobody spoke for a long time. Torin's purple fruit sat forgotten on his plate. Gela's crystals pulsed with a slow, deep blue light that Cole had never seen before, a color that felt like sadness given form. Draven was the last to move. The big Velthari sat perfectly still, his silver eyes locked on the table in front of him. He had lost a clutch brother in a skirmish years ago, a loss that he had never spoken about to anyone. He had buried it under anger and pride and mockery, because that was how his people handled grief. But sitting here, listening to a human speak the name of a dead woman with such simple, unguarded honesty, something cracked inside him. He did not apologize for the weeks of mocking. He did not say anything at all. But when he stood up from the table, he placed one heavy hand on Cole's shoulder for a brief moment, and the pressure of it said more than words could. Draven never called Cole Patchwork again. Later that night, a woman named Nora Calloway found Cole in the training bay. Nora was a human intelligence analyst stationed on Threshold, sharp-eyed and quiet, with the kind of mind that saw patterns where others saw noise. She carried a datapad loaded with months of surveillance data, communication intercepts, and movement analysis. "I have been tracking a Rathaki warlord named Sithrak," she told Cole. "He is unifying the clans, all of them. I'd have never seen anything like this. They are coordinating, planning, and staging resources along 3 different vectors aimed at coalition outposts." Savas had dismissed it as human anxiety, insisting that the Rathaki were too fractured and too primitive to mount a coordinated offensive. "She is wrong," Nora said, "and when this hits, it is going to hit hard." Cole took the datapad and studied it carefully, scrolling through the data with the same calm focus he brought to everything. After 20 minutes, he handed it back. "You are right," he said, "and Savas is going to get people killed." Nora looked at him. "What do we do?" Cole's scarred face was expressionless, but his eyes were already moving, already planning, already thinking 3 steps ahead. "We make sure our people are ready," he said, "even if command is not." The attack came at dawn, station time, when half of Threshold's command staff was between shifts, and the comm channels were running on skeleton crews. 3 coalition outposts along the outer reach were hit simultaneously. The coordination was flawless. The violence was overwhelming. Outpost Relin fell in 40 minutes. The garrison there had 90 soldiers. None of them survived. Outpost Den lasted an hour and 12 minutes before the Rathaki breached the inner walls and the last defenders were overrun. The distress signals from both stations arrived at Threshold within seconds of each other. And for the first time since Cole had been on the station, he saw real fear on alien faces. The third target was a mining colony called Marin's Drift. It was a small settlement built into the surface of a barren moon, home to about 400 civilians and a garrison of 60 coalition soldiers. It had mineral reserves that the Rathaki wanted, but more importantly, it sat at the junction of 3 transit lanes. Whoever held Marin's Drift controlled movement across the entire southern outer reach. Fireteam Kale was scrambled, along with every available unit on Threshold. Commander Savas, commanding from the safety of her office, issued orders that were broadcast to all responding forces. Hold defensive positions. Do not engage beyond the perimeter. Wait for the main fleet, which was 4 hours out. Cole listened to the orders on the shuttle's comm system and said nothing. Torin sat across from him, checking his rifle with hands that were steady now, where they would have been shaking a month ago. Dravan sat with his arms folded across his massive chest, his cracked shoulder plate replaced with a new one that gleamed under the shuttle lights. Gela hummed a low, constant tone that vibrated through the floor. A frequency Cole had learned meant she was preparing herself. When they dropped out of transit and Marin's Drift appeared on the shuttle's viewport, Cole's stomach tightened. The colony's shields were flickering, cycling between active and failed like a dying heartbeat. Smoke rose from 3 breach points in the outer wall. Rathaki dropships were scattered across the surface of the moon like black beetles, and streams of insectoid warriors were pouring through the gaps in the defenses. The garrison was fighting, but they were being pushed back, room by room, corridor by corridor. The shuttle landed inside the colony's inner compound, and Cole was moving before the ramp hit the ground. The scene inside was chaos. Wounded soldiers lay against walls, clutching injuries that no one had time to treat. Civilians huddled in groups behind barricades made of mining equipment and cargo containers. A Drosani officer was trying to organize a defensive line, but his people were scattered and scared, and the Rathaki were already inside the perimeter. Cole found the officer and spoke to him in a voice that cut through the noise like a blade through cloth. "How many fighters do you have?" The officer stared at him. "Who are you?" "That doesn't matter." "How many?" "Maybe 40. Half of them are wounded. Some of the civilians have picked up weapons, but they are miners, not soldiers." Cole nodded. He had fought with worse. He did not give a speech. He did not try to inspire anyone with words about duty or honor or glory. He simply began giving orders, and something about the way he gave them made people listen. His voice was calm. His instructions were clear. Every direction had a purpose that people could understand, even in their fear. He split the defenders into 3 groups. The first group he placed at the main corridor junction, where the walls narrowed and the Rathaki numbers would mean less. He put Draven at the center of that line and told him to hold it no matter what came through. Draven cracked his knuckles and said he would. The second group he positioned along the upper walkways, where they could fire down into the Rathaki advance. He placed Torin at the highest point with the best sightlines and told him to target anything that looked like a leader. The third group he kept mobile, a reserve force that could plug gaps and reinforce wherever the line was weakest. He put himself with this group. Gela he placed in a protected alcove behind the main line, close enough to reach the wounded, but shielded from direct fire. She hummed her acknowledgement and began setting up her medkit with crystalline hands that did not tremble. The Rathaki came. They came in waves, pouring through the breach points, with the clicking, shattering sound that Cole had learned to associate with death. They were fast, and they were many, and their black shells made them hard to see in the smoke-filled corridors. The first wave hit the main junction and crashed against the defensive line like a tide against rock. Draven stood at the center and did exactly what Cole had taught him. He did not charge. He held his ground, using his massive body as an anchor point, letting the Rathaki come to him, and then breaking them with precise, devastating strikes. The soldiers on either side of him fought harder because he was there, because seeing something that large and that unafraid made their own fear smaller. Torin fired from above. His rifle cracked once, twice, 3 times, and each shot found a Rathaki officer or squad leader. The enemy advance stuttered. Without their leaders clicking commands, individual warriors lost coordination, bunching together in ways that made them easier targets. Torin was doing what Cole had trained him to do, not just shooting, but reading the battlefield, finding the threads that held the enemy together and cutting them one by one. Cole fought wherever the line was weakest. He moved through the colony's corridors with the kind of brutal efficiency that came from years of doing this. Years of being the one who walked into the worst places and somehow walked out again. He fired and moved, always pushing forward just enough to keep the Rathaki off balance, never so far that he lost contact with his defenders. A Rathaki blade caught him across the back. The pain was bright and sharp, and he felt the warm spread of blood beneath his armor. He kept moving. Shrapnel from an exploding wall peppered his left leg, and the old limp came back worse than before. He kept moving. A concussive blast threw him against a wall, and his ears filled with a high ringing sound that turned the world into a muffled, distant place. He got up and kept moving. The civilians fought too. The miners of Marin's Drift were not soldiers, but they were people defending their home. And Cole had given them something to hold on to. Not hope exactly, but structure. A clear set of instructions. A sense that someone knew what they were doing. and that if they followed that someone, they might survive this. Gela worked behind the lines with a focus that bordered on ferocity. Her crystalline hands moved over wound after wound, her harmonic vibrations shifting constantly as she adapted her healing frequencies to different species. She saved 11 lives that day, pulling soldiers and civilians back from the edge with nothing but her medkit and the music of her body. Even when the walls shook and dust rained from the ceiling, she never stopped humming. The battle turned when the Rathaki committed their reserves to a final push through the eastern corridor. It was their strongest force, led by a war captain whose black shell was marked with ritual scars, a massive creature that stood a head taller than any other Rathaki on the field. Cole saw them coming and made his decision. He gathered every fighter he had in reserve, 12 soldiers and 8 armed civilians, and led them in a counterattack straight into the teeth of the Rathaki push. It was not a reckless charge. It was a calculated strike aimed at the tip of the enemy's spear, designed to break their momentum at the moment when they were most committed and least able to pull back. The fighting in the eastern corridor was close and savage. Cole found himself face to face with the Rathaki war captain, a creature that was faster, stronger, and more heavily armored than anything a human body was built to fight. The captain's blade came down in a strike that should have cut Cole in half. He twisted, took the blade across his side instead of through his center, and used the moment when the captain was overextended to drive his own weapon into the gap between the creature's neck plates. The war captain fell. The Rathaki line broke. The remaining warriors scattered into the corridors, and the defenders of Marin's Drift surged forward to seal the breaches. When the coalition fleet arrived 4 hours later, they found the colony standing, battered, bleeding, scarred in ways that would take months to repair, but standing. The defenders were gathered in the central compound, exhausted and wounded, tending to each other with whatever supplies were left. Cole was found sitting against a wall near the eastern corridor. His armor was torn. Blood from at least 4 different wounds had soaked through his clothing and dried in dark streaks across his skin. New cuts layered over old scars. His left leg was swollen and stiff, and the ringing in his ears had not stopped. Gela knelt beside him, her crystal body pulsing with a warm golden light as she worked on his wounds. She hummed a sharp, scolding frequency that Cole had come to recognize. It meant "You are not fine," and stop saying you are. Cole leaned his head back against the wall and looked up at the damaged ceiling of the colony he had helped save. "I am fine, Gela," he said quietly. Her hum sharpened to a pitch that could have cut glass. He almost smiled. The aftermath of Marin's Drift moved through the coalition like a shockwave. Every war room, every council chamber, every officer's mess on every station in coalition space was talking about it. 2 outposts had fallen. The third should have fallen too. Every tactical model, every simulation, every projection said that Marin's Drift could not hold against a full Rathaki assault with a garrison of 60 and no fleet support. But it held. And the reason it held had a name. Commander Ledra Savas was the first to face consequences. The Coalition Review Board examined her dismissal of Nora Calloway's intelligence, her failure to authorize a preemptive reinforcement of the border outposts, and her defensive orders that would have condemned Marin's Drift to fall while the garrison waited for a fleet that was hours away. Savas sat before the board with her silver eyes fixed straight ahead and her armored jaw clenched tight. She did not apologize. Velthari did not apologize. But she was reassigned to a logistics post in the interior, far from the outer reach, and far from any position where her decisions could cost lives. Nora Calloway was promoted to Senior Intelligence Analyst, given a staff of 12, and tasked with building a comprehensive early warning network along the entire outer reach border. She accepted the position with the same quiet focus she brought to everything. When a Drosani admiral told her that her work had saved 400 lives, she shook her head and said that Cole Brannigan had saved 400 lives. She had just written a report. The report on the battle itself spread far beyond military channels. Journalists from the coalition's major information networks picked it up. Historians requested access to the combat recordings. Species that had never paid attention to humans before were suddenly asking questions about this small, soft, short-lived species that somehow refused to die when they were supposed to. Cole was unaware of most of this. He spent the first 3 days after the battle in the med bay on Threshold, sitting on a bed while doctors worked on his wounds. The gash across his back required 40 stitches. The shrapnel in his leg was removed piece by piece. The cracked ribs from the concussive blast were wrapped and treated. The cut from the war captain's blade left a thick, ugly scar along his left side that would never fully fade. He was patient with the doctors. He did not complain. When they told him he needed rest, he nodded and then walked to the training bay as soon as they were not looking. On the 4th day, a message arrived. Cole Brannigan was summoned to appear before the Coalition High Council. The High Council chamber was built to make anyone standing in it feel small. It was a vast, circular room at the heart of Threshold, with tiered seating that rose upward like the inside of an enormous bowl. Representatives from every member species sat in their designated sections, their forms ranging from the towering Velthari to the delicate insect-winged Felinari, to the stone-bodied Gorvathi, who rarely moved and rarely spoke. Light fell from above in a single wide beam that illuminated the center of the floor, where the summoned individual was meant to stand. Cole walked into that light in his dress uniform. The uniform was clean and pressed, but it could not hide the scars on his face and hands. Fresh bandages were visible beneath his collar, where the wound on his back was still healing. He stood straight, his weight shifted slightly off his bad leg, and he looked up at the assembled council without expression. The head counselor, a Velthari elder named Thesson, whose armored skin had turned white with age, spoke first. He described the Battle of Marin's Drift in formal terms, listing the forces involved, the casualties sustained, and the strategic outcome. Then he turned his ancient silver eyes to Cole and told him that the council wished to bestow upon him the Star of the Coalition, the highest military honor that existed. It had not been given to a human before. But that was not all. Thesson continued, explaining that the council was forming a new rapid response force designed to counter the growing Rithaki threat. They wanted Cole to command it. Not just a fire team, not just a squad, but an entire task force, with ships, soldiers, and resources drawn from every member species. It was an offer that would have made Cole one of the most powerful human military officers in galactic history. The chamber was silent. Every eye was on the scarred human standing in the beam of light. Cole was quiet for a long time. He looked down at his hands, at the white lines crossing his knuckles and fingers, at the calluses and the old burns and the places where the skin had been torn apart and put back together so many times that it no longer looked quite right. These were the hands that had carried Katie Morrow through 6 miles of burning jungle. These were the hands that had held a rifle at the relay station while his squad learned what he was made of. These were the hands that had driven a blade into a Rithaki war captain at Marin's Drift, while his blood soaked the floor beneath him. He looked up. "I am grateful for the honor," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the entire chamber without effort. "And I mean no disrespect to this council, or to the species represented here. But I am not a general. I am not a commander. I am not a man who belongs behind a desk, or in a war room, or at the head of a fleet." He paused. "I am a soldier. I fight beside my squad, not above them. I know their strengths, and their fears, and the sound of their breathing when they are scared. That is where I am useful. That is where I belong. The council shifted. Some murmured. This was not what they had expected. I ask only one thing, Cole said. Keep Fireteam Kale together. Assign us to the front lines. Let us do what we do. Thesson studied him for a long, quiet moment. Then the old Velthari nodded slowly and granted the request. Cole turned to leave. He had taken 3 steps toward the chamber door when a voice stopped him. It came from the upper tiers, from a section reserved for retired military leaders. An ancient Velthari warrior named Korath sat there, a figure so old that his armored plates had cracked and faded to the color of ash. Korath had fought in wars that most of the council had only read about. He had commanded fleets and broken sieges and watched civilizations rise and fall. He rarely attended council sessions, and he almost never spoke. Human, Korath said. His voice was deep and rough, like stone grinding against stone. I would ask you something. Cole stopped. He did not turn around. Your species, Korath continued. You break so easily. Your skin tears. Your bones snap. You do not regenerate. You do not heal cleanly. You carry every wound you have ever received written on your bodies for the rest of your short lives. Why do you keep fighting? What drives a creature that fragile to walk into the fire again and again? The chamber was perfectly silent. Not a breath. Cole stood still for a moment, his back to the council, his scarred hands at his sides. Then he spoke, and his voice was steady and plain, like a man stating a simple fact about the way the universe worked. We do not fight because we cannot be broken, he said. We fight because we have been broken and we got back up. Every scar is a door we walked through and came out the other side. That is not weakness. He paused. That is what we are made of. He walked out of the chamber without looking back. The door closed behind him, and the silence held for a long time. In the gallery above the main floor, Draven stood with Torin and Gela, watching the door through which Cole had disappeared. Torin's golden eyes were wide. Gela's crystal body pulsed with a deep, resonant blue that filled the air around her with a sound like a hymn. Draven stood perfectly still, his massive arms at his sides, and on his face was an expression that he had never worn before, and that no Velthari had ever directed toward a human. It was reverence, pure and simple, and completely without reservation. Cole walked back to the barracks. The corridors of Threshold were busy with soldiers and diplomats and traders going about their lives, and none of them stopped to look at him. He was just a human with scars, walking with a slight limp, carrying nothing special about him that the eye could see. He pushed open the barracks door and stepped inside. Torin was at his bunk, cleaning his rifle with the careful, practiced motions that Cole had taught him. Draven was in the corner, sparring with a training dummy, his strikes precise and controlled in a way that they never would have been 2 months ago. Gela was calibrating her medkit, her crystals glowing with a soft, steady light. They all looked up when Cole walked in. He dropped his gear on his bunk. He sat down. He looked at them, these 3 aliens who had gone from mocking him to trusting him to something deeper than either word could describe. When is the next mission briefing? He asked. Torin smiled, a quick flash of white teeth against green scales. 2 hours. Draven grunted. About time. I was getting bored. Gela hummed a warm, welcoming chord that wrapped around all of them like sunlight. Cole leaned back on his bunk and closed his eyes. For the first time in a very long time, the weight in his chest felt a little lighter. Not gone. It would never be gone, but lighter, like he had finally found a place where carrying it did not have to be done alone. Decades later, an unnamed historian from the Sheik Archival Collective would write about the Battle of Marin's Drift and the human who held it. The entry was brief by Sheik standards, only a few thousand harmonics long, but it was considered one of the most important records of the era. It noted that the battle was the moment the galaxy stopped underestimating humans. But more importantly, it said, it was the moment when the rest of the galaxy stopped asking why humans carried so many scars, and finally understood what those scars truly meant. Cole Brannigan never wrote a memoir. He never accepted a title. He never sought fame or recognition, or any of the things that most species considered the rewards of heroism. He simply kept fighting, kept leading, kept standing up every time the universe knocked him down. His name did not echo in the grand halls of the coalition or in the speeches of politicians. It lived in quieter places, in barracks and trenches and field hospitals, whispered by soldiers of every species who needed to believe that one person's stubborn refusal to quit could change the course of everything. They mocked his scars. He turned and walked into legend. And the legend was not about the things he did. It was about the thing he was. Broken, scarred, held together by nothing but will and the memory of the people he could not save. And somehow, against every expectation, against every odd, against every voice that told him he was too damaged and too fragile and too human, that was enough. The station called Threshold hung in the black emptiness of space, like a city made of metal and light. It was enormous. Hundreds of ships docked along its arms every day, carrying traders, diplomats, soldiers, and refugees from dozens of alien species. The Velthari walked its corridors with their 8-foot frames and armored skin that could stop a bullet. The Drasani moved through the crowds with their sleek, scaled bodies and sharp golden eyes. The Sheik drifted quietly, their crystalline forms catching the light and throwing tiny rainbows on the walls as they passed. And then there were the humans, small, soft, short-lived, and mostly ignored. Cole Brannigan stepped off the transport shuttle with a single bag over his shoulder and a datapad in his hand. He was 36 years old, average height, with broad shoulders, and a body that moved like it remembered pain. His face told a story that most people did not want to read. A thick scar ran from his left temple down across his cheek and ended at the corner of his jaw. His left eye had a faint cloudy look to it, damaged by shrapnel that field medics had only partially fixed. His hands were rough and crossed with old white lines where skin had been torn open and healed badly. He walked with a slight limp in his right leg, and he carried himself with the kind of quiet stillness that came from having seen things that could not be unseen. Nobody on the docking platform paid him any attention. He was just another human, and humans were not impressive to anyone out here. Cole followed the signs to the military wing of the station and reported to the office of Commander Lydra Savas. Savas was Velthari, tall even by her people's standards, with dark blue armored skin and eyes like polished silver. She looked down at Cole the way someone might look at a stray animal that had wandered into the wrong building. She told him he was being assigned to Fireteam Kale, a mixed species squad that handled routine patrols and border enforcement along the Outer Reach. The Outer Reach was a lawless stretch of space at the edge of Coalition territory, full of pirate clans, smugglers, and things that were worse than both. It was not a glamorous posting. It was the kind of assignment given to soldiers that nobody expected much from. Cole nodded, took his orders, and said nothing else. Savas watched him leave with a look that said she had already forgotten his name. The Fireteam Kale barracks were on the lower levels of the station, where the lighting was dimmer and the air recyclers hummed a little louder. Cole walked in and found 3 aliens already there. The first was Torin, a young Drasani, with bright green scales and nervous eyes. He was a marksman, fresh out of training, and he had never been in a real fight. He sat on his bunk, polishing a scope that did not need polishing. The second was Gela, a chic field medic. Her body was made of something that looked like living crystal, pale blue and faintly glowing, and she communicated through harmonic vibrations that sounded like music played on instruments that did not exist. The third was Draven, and Draven was a problem. Draven was Velthari, nearly as tall as Savas, with dark gray armored plates, and fists the size of Cole's head. He was a brawler, loud and proud, and he had made it very clear to everyone on the station that he thought humans were the weakest species in the Coalition. When Cole walked through the door, Draven looked him up and down, and let out a low, rumbling laugh. "They sent us a human," Draven said, "and not even a whole one. He is more scar than skin." Torin glanced at Cole, and then quickly looked away, but not before whispering to Gela, "Do humans always look this damaged?" Gela hummed a neutral tone that could have meant anything. Cole said nothing. He walked to the empty bunk at the far end of the room, set his bag down, and began unpacking. His movements were slow and deliberate. He checked his rifle first, running his scarred hands over every piece of it, with the careful attention of someone who knew that a weapon was the difference between living and dying. Then he stored his gear, made his bunk with military precision, and sat down. Draven watched him with open contempt. "I asked for a real soldier," he said loudly. "Instead they gave me patchwork." The name stuck immediately. Torin repeated it under his breath. Even Gela seemed to register it, her crystals flickering with a brief pulse of light. He picked up his datapad and began reviewing mission files. At mealtime, Cole sat alone in the mess hall. The long tables were crowded with soldiers from a dozen species, all talking and laughing and arguing in languages that filled the air like a living thing. Cole ate his food in silence. A few aliens glanced at him, saw the scars, and looked away. One Drosani officer leaned toward a colleague and made a comment that Cole could not hear, but could easily guess. The colleague laughed. This was not new to Cole. He had been underestimated his entire career. Humans were the newcomers in the Coalition, a species that had only been part of the galactic community for a few decades. They did not regenerate like the Velthari. They did not have armored skin or enhanced senses. They bled easily, they scarred permanently, and they lived short lives compared to most other species. To the rest of the galaxy, humans were fragile things that broke too easily and died too quickly to be worth taking seriously. Cole finished his meal, returned his tray, and walked to the observation deck on the station's outer ring. He stood alone at the viewport, his reflection ghosting over the glass, and looked out at the outer reach. The stars were thin and scattered out there, and the darkness between them seemed deeper and heavier than anywhere else in the galaxy. Somewhere in that darkness, things were moving. Things that would eventually come for all of them. A memory surfaced without warning. Fire, screaming, the wet sound of mud sucking at his boots as he dragged a wounded soldier through a burning jungle with one arm, while the other hung useless and broken at his side. The weight of a body on his back. The sound of Katie Morrow whispering his name, asking him to keep going, and then going quiet, 30 feet from the extraction point. He had been 30 feet away from saving her. Cole closed his eyes. He let the memory sit in his chest for a moment, heavy and sharp, like a piece of metal that had never been removed. Then he opened his eyes, turned away from the viewport, and walked back to the barracks. He lay down on his bunk in the dark, listening to Dravan's heavy breathing and the faint musical hum of Gela's resting frequencies. Torin shifted restlessly on the bunk across from him, already dreaming about something that made his scales ripple with nervous color. Cole stared at the ceiling. He did not need anyone on this station to like him. He did not need anyone to understand him. He had not come here for respect or recognition. He had come here because there was a fight somewhere ahead of him, and fighting was the only thing he had left that made sense. Outside the viewport, the outer reach stretched on in silence, dark and patient, and full of things that were waiting.